The hunter, 30, lean as fence wire, didn't blink as he pushed into it. He didn't mind being cold. Cold meant quiet. Cold meant no one was asking anything of him. His hound padded ahead, a lumbering shadow with one ear chewed ragged and a limp in the rear leg, more bone than bark these days. Old Buck had seen too much to spook easy, but tonight he paused at every bend in the trail. Nose twitching. Whine low in his throat. The hunter glanced up once, past the lip of his hat. Just snow. Just dusk. Just the world as it always was, empty and demanding. Then Buck veered right, growled, and took off. The hunter didn't shout, didn't panic, just followed. 20 yards down, the scent hit him too. Not game. Not blood. Something human. Something wrong. She looked like a ghost caught in midfall, curled at the base of a juniper with snow packed around her skirts like she'd become part of the land. Pale dress clung to her like it didn't belong, lay stiff with frost. The veil, Lord above, there was a veil, was twisted in the branches. Wind tugged it softly, like it was trying to free her or claim her. He crouched beside her. Hand steady. Breath visible. Her skin was like blue porcelain. Hair dark and tangled. Lips cracked. No movement save for the faintest flutter at her throat, barely there. Not dead. Not yet. He wrapped her in his coat. Lifted her like she weighed nothing. She didn't stir, not even when her arm slipped free and something tumbled from her grasp. An envelope, half-burnt, marked by soot and melted edges. Buck circled them, then led the way back. No questions. No explanations. The cabin came into view as night deepened, its roof thick with snow, chimney breathing faint trails of wood smoke. Inside, the fire was still alive from morning, banked low. The hunter didn't bother lighting the lanterns. Shadows were fine. They didn't ask where a man had been, or why he'd come back different. He laid her near the hearth, wrapped tight in blankets, boots off. Steam rose from the thawing of her dress. He fed the fire slowly, careful not to shock her with heat. Her hands were torn. Her nails split. There were bruises that didn't come from falling. He noticed without staring. Observed like he might observe a wounded doe, aware that even kindness could startle her further from life. She didn't wake that night. He sat with her anyway. Mended a broken strap on his rifle. Watched the way the light flickered over her face, drawing soft shadows over her hollowed cheeks. Once, just before dawn, she whimpered. Just a sound. But it cracked something open in him he didn't know still had edges. In the morning, he fed Buck. Chopped wood. Shoveled a path from door to shed. Routine held the world steady. When he came back in, she was awake. Not moving. Not speaking. But awake. Her eyes, wide and dark, locked on the ceiling like it was telling secrets. He didn't speak. Just knelt beside her and offered warm broth. She didn't take it. The next time, he tried again. This time she drank. Not all. Just enough. That was how the next 2 days passed. In gestures. In offerings. In silence that didn't feel cruel. He watched her watch the fire like she was trying to remember what warmth meant. Her voice came on the 3rd day, cracked and low. You didn't leave me there. He didn't look up from where he was peeling potatoes. Just said, wasn't planning to. She swallowed. The sound was rough. There was a letter. He nodded toward the table. Still got it. She tried to sit up. Winced. He moved to help but stopped halfway. She managed it herself, slow as rising fog. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated. Not out of secrecy, just hadn't used it much lately. Calder. She closed her eyes a moment. Then nodded like she'd heard it before, long ago. Her own name came later, when the wind had quieted and snow turned to sleet. Maribel, she said, barely audible. Maribel James. The fire cracked. Buck raised his head. Calder froze. He had known that name once. From a letter his brother had tossed into the stove with a laugh. From a parcel addressed in fine script that sat unopened for weeks until the ink faded. Maribel James. The girl back east his brother had courted through post, spoken sweet nothings, promised a ranch, a ring, a life. But he'd left before she ever arrived. Gone south chasing gold or glory or another woman. Calder hadn't seen him since. Now here she was, wearing the remnants of a wedding dress in his cabin. Skin bruised by the world. Voice like wind through dry grass. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. She wouldn't know the older brother. The one who'd stayed behind. The one who buried their father when the fever took him. The one who never replied to those letters because he figured it wasn't his place. She didn't ask about his silence, and he didn't offer it. Later that night, while she dozed beneath a pile of quilts, Calder dug out the tin box from beneath the floorboards. The one with his father's belongings and old papers. Inside, folded twice and watermarked, was the ledger his father kept. Scratched between cattle sales and seed orders was a name. James, Maribel, arrival expected, February 1874. His father had written it like it meant something. Like he believed in what his younger son promised. Calder closed the ledger. Sat in the dark for a long while. He didn't feel angry. Didn't even feel surprised. Just hollow. Like he'd walked into a room expecting dust and found an heirloom instead. Fragile. Forgotten. Precious in a way no one remembered to speak of. She was sleeping soundly now. Breathing deeper. Her face less pinched. In the lamplight her features softened, sharp angles rounding out like spring beneath frost. He wondered how long she had walked before she collapsed. Wondered who'd seen her. Who'd turned her away. She hadn't told him her story yet. But it was etched in the blisters on her feet. The blood in her socks. The way she flinched from the shadow of his hand. In the barn the next morning, Calder found an old trunk of his mother's. Inside, a faded shawl, a pair of soft boots, a dried sprig of lavender wrapped in a ribbon. He dusted them off and set them by the hearth without a word. Maribel noticed. Smiled. Faintly. Wore the boots all day. On the fifth evening she asked, "Is this your land?" Calder nodded. "What's left of it? Do you like it?" He stared out the window a while. Snow falling again, soft and unhurried. "It's quiet. Quiet suits me." She looked at the fire, then back at him. "Me too." The dog slept with its head on her knee now. Calder watched them, something slow stirring in his chest, like embers finding breath again. He didn't know what she wanted. If she would leave when she could walk again. If she'd ever forgive the name she once came here to marry. But for now, she was alive. Breathing the same warm air. And that was something. The storm that brought her had passed, but another one waited, quieter, heavier. Not made of snow, but of things unspoken. Still, Calder wasn't afraid of storms. Not anymore. He'd already survived the kind that left you standing alone in the ruins. And this time, someone had survived with him. The mornings came slow and pale, the kind that carried no birdsong, only the shifting creak of trees under wind. Inside the cabin, warmth lived in careful places, between the bricks of the hearth, beneath the shawl draped around her shoulders, and in the quiet rituals Calder never commented on. A kettle always steaming, bread thick with honey. A coat draped over the chair closest to the fire, not offered, just left there. Maribel no longer asked if she was a burden. Her words were rationed like coin, and Calder seemed the sort to accept silence as truth. But still, something changed between them, minute shifts, like meltwater loosening frostbit stone. One morning, she found him sharpening a knife outside the door, sleeves rolled, hat tugged low. She watched him through the window for a long time before stepping out barefoot. The snow was mostly gone from the stoop. The chill bit through the wood but not her skin. "You always work like that?" she asked. He looked up, eyes unreadable. "Only when there's work to be done." She glanced at the blade in his hand. "That one's already sharp." Calder shrugged, but said nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was watchful. Alive. That evening, when she reached for the kettle, her sleeve tugged high. He noticed the bruises then, yellowing, long-fingered, layered one over the next like someone had tried to erase her with their hands. His expression didn't change. He didn't ask, and she didn't explain. But he placed the kettle in her grip so gently it made her breath catch. Later, while she sat cross-legged on the hearthrug, she whispered, "I waited 3 days at the station. The train dropped me in Coldwater, and I waited. Thought maybe he was late. Thought maybe I had the date wrong." Calder didn't move. Just leaned back in his chair, arms folded, gaze steady. She went on, slower now, like the words were being pulled from a deep well. People stared. "I tried to ask for him, but they didn't know his name. Some said he'd never lived there. One man said he'd gone south. Another swore he saw him in Kansas months ago with a different woman." She pulled the shawl tighter, her hands trembling. "I ran out of money. I couldn't stay in the hotel. A woman in the mercantile told me to go back east. I told her I had no east left." Outside, the wind was rising again, brushing against the cabin walls like a dog asking to be let in. "I walked," she whispered. "No plan. Just thought maybe I'd find work. Or someone who knew him." The storm came fast. He didn't interrupt. Just listened, still and sure, as if giving her all the time she needed. When she finished, Calder stirred only to toss another log on the fire. Then he stood and crossed to the table. From beneath a tin of tobacco, he pulled out the old ledger again. She watched as he opened to a page near the back. "Here," he said. She leaned forward. Her name was written in brown ink, delicate and deliberate. Maribel James, arrival expected, February 1874. She ran a fingertip over the letters. "Your father." He nodded. "Kept good records." She stared at the page, then at Calder. "You're his brother." His jaw moved once before he answered. "Jonathan's brother, yes." She leaned back slowly. "You knew." "I didn't, not at first." Maribel didn't ask why he hadn't said anything. She saw the answer in the way his hands fidgeted with the ledger's corner. In the way his eyes didn't flinch but also didn't meet hers. "You stayed," she said instead. "He didn't." Calder gave a short nod. "He left a lot of things behind." They didn't speak for a long time after that. The next day, she mended the lining of his coat. He didn't ask her to. Just left it on the peg, ripped from shoulder to hem. She sat by the fire with a needle and thread she found in the drawer, stitching with slow, neat rows. When he returned from the barn, he looked at the coat like he didn't recognize it. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know." He wore it anyway. They settled into a rhythm after that. Mornings were for chores. She helped stack wood, gathered eggs from the hens, though her body still ached in places she didn't mention. Calder worked mostly in silence, but now and then he asked her about little things. What kind of tea she liked. If she preferred sugar or molasses. Where she'd learned to sew that neat. "An aunt," she said once, "raised me after my mother passed. Always told me a woman should know how to put things back together." "She taught you well." "She didn't teach me what to do when something breaks that can't be sewn." Calder didn't offer comfort, just understanding. And somehow, that was better. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. Maribel startled, rising too fast, her hand instinctively brushing against the fire poker. Calder opened it slowly, his frame blocking the threshold. It was an older woman, gray braid, coat lined with fur. Her name was Mabel Cook, from town. She'd heard of a girl found in the storm. "Brought some cloth," she said, "and a pot of lard for the burn on Maribel's hand she'd heard rumor of." Maribel stayed near the hearth, wary but polite. Mabel chatted easily, more to Calder than her. "If the girl needs a place," she said, "we got a room above the mercantile." "She's staying here," Calder said, not harshly but final. Mabel's eyes flicked to Maribel, then back to Calder. "Ain't my business, but folks'll talk." "Let 'em," he said. "They'll do it anyway." Mabel didn't press. just left the cloth and the pot of lard and a loaf of bread that smelled of cinnamon. As she left, she gave Maribel a long look, something between worry and wonder. That night, Maribel made cornbread from the loaf. Calder said it was the best he'd tasted in years. She smiled, a real one this time. Maybe that's just the cinnamon. He shook his head. No, it's the cook. The next morning, he brought her a scarf he'd found in a chest. Soft wool, faded blue. She ran it between her fingers like she was afraid it might vanish. "You sure?" she asked. "It suits you," he said. That evening, as the sun draped gold over the snow-melt ridges, Calder brought in an old oil lamp from the barn and set it on the table. "Used to read by this," he said. Father kept it burning long past sunset. She lit it with a match, the glow painting her face in soft amber. "Then let's read." He pulled down a book from the shelf, an almanac, dusty but clean. They read aloud in turns, tripping over strange words and laughing quietly when she called a coyote a prairie fox. Calder's laugh came sudden and surprised, like it had been buried deep and forgotten. Afterward, she sat by the window, scarf wrapped around her shoulders, watching the moon rise over the trees. "I used to dream of wide spaces," she said. "Land where the sky didn't feel like a ceiling." "Dreams change," he said. "Some die. Some wake up different." She turned, met his eyes, and saw not a man rescuing her out of pity, but someone who understood what it meant to be left behind, who had chosen the long road instead of the easy one. That night, as she tucked herself into the cot by the hearth, she whispered something to the shadows. "I'm not angry at you," she said. He didn't answer. She wasn't speaking to Calder. Not really. But when the firelight flickered just right, she thought she saw him pause, just long enough to understand. Snow came again the next day, light and half-hearted. It blanketed the trees but melted fast on the cabin's roof. Calder stood outside, looking at the tracks leading away, his, hers, the dog's, faint paths threaded through the white. He didn't speak, but when he came inside, he hung his coat on the second peg. Not his usual one. Hers. Maribel noticed. Said nothing. Just pulled the scarf tighter and stirred the stew on the stove. In the fire's glow, something had begun to change. Not love, not yet, but something quieter, gentler. Trust, maybe, or the roots of it. The fire was smaller now. Not for lack of wood, but because they'd learned how to tend it gently. Keep it low, steady, never too hot. Calder said a fire too high burns through the night too fast. Maribel, who had once lived by stoves and lamps that only offered heat in brief spurts, believed him. The days had begun to lengthen, just slightly. Frost still clung to the eaves in the morning, but by noon, the icicles wept. Sap rose in the trees. Crows had returned, distant and sparse, calling like old debts come back to be settled. Maribel moved differently now. Her steps were surer, though still cautious. She no longer flinched at door hinges or shadows across windows. The bruise on her cheek had faded to the color of smoke. Some nights she hummed while washing the dishes, soft melodies without words. Calder never interrupted her, never asked what the tune meant. He simply let her sing, and in the letting, something between them softened further. They did not speak of Jonathan. Not in name. Not yet. But pieces of him surfaced in their shared silences. Stories folded into glances, in the way Calder stared at the fire too long some nights, as if trying to find the outlines of someone he'd lost there. Maribel understood that kind of looking. She'd done it herself. On the train. In the snow. Even now, when the wind shifted just right and stirred the veil she kept hidden beneath the cot. One evening, while Calder was splitting kindling by the porch, she opened the small box she'd carried tucked inside her boot. Inside, the burned letter, the bent photograph of a house Jonathan had promised, and a dried flower pressed between two thin pages of scripture. She set the letter on the table and read it again, even though the fire had eaten most of the words. "My dearest Maribel," it began. The rest was ash-browned and charred at the edges. Promises half consumed. A trail of ink that ended in lies. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Grief had become something quieter, like the worn seam in a glove, felt more than seen. That night, she handed Calder the photograph. "He sent this with his third letter," she said. Calder took it without comment. The image was faded, nearly rubbed bare by her fingers. A whitewashed house, 2 stories, front porch with a swing. It looked nothing like their cabin. "He told me it was his," she said. "Said he'd built it with his own hands. Said I'd sit on that swing come spring." Calder studied the picture a long time. Then he handed it back. "It's from a catalog," he said. "Used to be one like that on the counter at the general store. Folks sent east for things they'd never see." Maribel smiled faintly. "I should have known." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You should have had someone who didn't lie." The fire crackled, sending up sparks. Buck, sleeping at Calder's feet, thumped his tail once before settling deeper. "I wasn't foolish," she said. "Just lonely." He didn't correct her. Didn't offer comfort or contradiction. Only said, "That makes 2 of us." Spring tried again the next week. The snow receded from the river, and the trees near the edge began to bud. Calder took Maribel to the bank one morning. The walk was short, but her breath came fast by the end. He didn't rush her. They sat on a fallen log, boots resting in mud that smelled of thaw and moss. "When I was a girl," she said, "I thought running away meant freedom. I dreamed of leaving my aunt's house, of being chosen by someone brave. Someone who saw me. And when Jonathan wrote me—" She paused. "I thought that was it. The beginning of everything." Calder looked out at the water. "And now? Now I think beginnings are quiet. And sometimes they come after endings." He didn't say anything, but he reached down and picked up a small stone, turned it in his hand, then offered it to her. "Smooth," he said. "River wore all the sharp off." She took it, rolling it between her fingers. It was warm from his palm. Back at the cabin, she set the stone on the windowsill. Beside it, she placed a second one the same color, found days earlier outside the barn. She didn't know why, only that they looked right together. That evening, she stitched a patch over Calder's shirt pocket. He wore that shirt every Sunday, though he never said why. "You don't mind mending things," he said, watching her work. "I like giving things another chance." He nodded. "That's what I thought." Later, while they shared cornbread and coffee, she told him about her aunt's garden, the way lilacs bloomed so thick in May that the bees sang until dusk. She spoke of lilac jam, of how it tasted like sunlight and soft endings. Calder listened, his expression thoughtful. When she went to rinse the cups, he stood and rummaged in the tall cupboard near the stove. After a moment, he pulled out a glass jar, dusty and half full. "Old Mabel's lilac honey," he said. "Bought it last summer, forgot it was there." She held it like it might disappear. "You'd share it. It's sweeter with company." She spooned it onto the last bit of cornbread, and for a heartbeat, the world was just the warmth of that bite, the memory of blossoms, and the man across from her, who never asked for anything he wouldn't offer first. Their connection deepened without ceremony. Not romance, not yet, but a recognition, a steadiness. The fire they shared was not one of flames, but of coals banked carefully, warmth rising in quiet, reliable pulses. One gray morning, Calder left to trade pelts in town. He was gone 3 days. Maribel kept the cabin, fed the hens, swept the hearth, wrote in the margins of old papers she found, just little things, words she hadn't said aloud. When he returned, boots muddy and shoulders stiff, he handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. She opened it slowly. Inside, a length of sky-blue ribbon, a tin of tea labeled marigold and mint, and a pair of gloves. Sturdy. Her size. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. He shrugged, looking anywhere but at her. "You've earned more than thanks." She didn't hug him, didn't reach for his hand. But she touched the gloves to her cheek, just once, and he looked at her then like he might never forget the way she did it. That night, the fire burned longer than usual. She braided her hair by the window, watching snow melt from the roof. "You've never asked why I stayed," she said. Calder paused in the act of setting a log on the flames. Didn't seem like the sort of question that needed asking. "I stayed," she said, "because here I breathe easier." He sat down slowly, the firelight playing against the worn lines of his face. "That's all the reason I need." The moment sat between them, untouched, like a letter unsealed. The following week, she found a bird's nest near the woodshed. Empty, but perfect. She placed it in the crook of the windowsill, next to the stones. Calder didn't ask, but when he added a feather he'd found on the trail, she smiled. "Things don't always have to be used," she said. "Sometimes they just have to be seen." His eyes met hers. "I see you." It was the first time either of them had said anything like that aloud. No flourish. No declaration. Just truth, dropped like a pebble into a still pond. After that, something shifted. He sat closer by the fire. She handed him her mending needle without needing to ask. He tried. His stitches were crooked, but she didn't mind. One evening, he passed her his mother's old Bible. She opened it carefully, flipping through the brittle pages. In the back, a list of names. Marriages. Births. Deaths. He pointed to a space beneath his father's name. Empty. "I haven't added anything since he passed," Calder said. She looked up at him, heart tight. "Would you?" he asked. "Write your name in?" Maribel didn't answer at first. She took the pencil slowly, her hand shaking a little, and beneath the empty space, in careful script, she wrote, "Maribel James, Spring, 1874. She left no title, no claim. Just her name, steady as a promise." The next morning, Calder found her standing outside, arms wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon. "I heard the river in my dream," she said. He stepped beside her, close but not touching. "What did it say?" She looked up at him. "It said I'm not done beginning yet." Calder didn't speak, just reached into his coat and placed something in her hand. It was the veil, cleaned, pressed, folded with care. "I thought maybe, someday, you'd want it again," he said. She held it to her chest, eyes shining, lips parted with a breath she hadn't taken in years. Then she looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him, and something broke open between them, silent and slow, like sunrise over snow. They didn't kiss, didn't embrace. But when she reached out and took his hand, he held it like it was the first true thing he'd touched in a decade. The fire behind them burned low, but warm, and neither of them looked away. The wind changed before he came. It came down from the north, sharp and dry, brushing through the tall grass like it was clearing its throat. Calder felt it first while checking the fencing near the edge of the property. Buck lifted his nose, ears twitching toward the horizon. Something was shifting. Not the weather. Something closer. More personal. Maribel noticed it too, though she couldn't have named why. The days had been kind lately, the kind that hinted at green things beneath the thaw. But that morning, the cabin felt different. She caught herself glancing over her shoulder, her fingers fumbling at the buttons of her shawl as if they couldn't remember their own rhythm. It wasn't until late afternoon that he arrived, riding in on a dust-choked mare with a crooked saddle and a too familiar smirk. Jonathan, younger than Calder by 3 years, but already frayed around the edges in the way of men who traded permanence for promises. His coat was too fine for the dirt he dragged in, and the grin he wore was one that had sold many lies and mourned none of them. Calder was stacking chopped wood by the barn when he heard the hoofbeats. Buck bristled at the sight of the stranger, growling low in his throat. "Well, damn," Jonathan said, dismounting. "Didn't think the old dog'd still be kickin'. Or that you would, for that matter." Calder didn't move from his work. His hands were steady on the axe handle. "Didn't think you'd be back. I wasn't plannin' on it." Jonathan patted his coat, brushing off invisible dust. "But you know how things go. Got a little business to sort out." Calder said nothing. His eyes locked on the man in front of him like one might watch a coyote circling too close to the hens. Jonathan sniffed the air, chuckled. Something smells good. You cookin'? Or is that her? The axe thunked deep into a log. Where is she? Jonathan asked, voice lighter than the question deserved. In the house, Calder said. Jonathan smiled wider. Good. I'll just... She's not yours. That stopped him. Not long. Just a flicker. But Calder saw it. She came here looking for me, Jonathan said, tone suddenly righteous. She's my bride. Got the papers to prove it. You had your chance. Calder pulled the axe from the wood with a single tug. You left her. You don't get to come claim her now like she's some parcel you forgot to collect. She's got my name. No, Calder said quietly. She has her own. Maribel stepped out onto the porch then, her hand resting lightly against the doorframe. The late sun caught the blue ribbon in her hair, the one Calder had given her. She didn't say a word at first, just looked at Jonathan like he was a ghost dragged up from under ice. He took off his hat, dipped his head like charm might patch what abandonment broke. Maribel, he said, soft as honey left too long in the jar. You look, well, Lord, you're beautiful. She didn't move, didn't smile. I was headed back, Jonathan went on. I got caught up in Missouri, ran short on funds, meant to write, meant to send for you. Did you? She said. Not a question, just a simple wait. He nodded, too eagerly. I missed you. She stared at him. What was her name? He blinked. Who? The woman you were with in Kansas. His mouth opened, closed. That ain't what it looked like. Folks talk. They do, she said, voice like clean linen. So do you. Jonathan stepped closer. Calder shifted, but Maribel raised a hand. Not for defense, just finality. I walked through a blizzard, she said. Slept in a barn beneath a tarp. Thought I was dying. I didn't say your name out loud once. I stopped carrying hope like it owed me anything. He looked wounded, but not from guilt, only the sting of being seen clearly for once. I know I hurt you, he said. But we can fix this. Start over. She gave the smallest smile. It was colder than the wind. No, Jonathan. You don't get to start something you never meant to finish. But You left me, she said. That's not something a good man forgets to fix. Calder stepped forward, not looming, not angry, just present. Solid in a way Jonathan had never learned to be. She's staying, Calder said. Jonathan scoffed. That what this is? You think you can take what's mine? She's not yours. The silence that followed was thick, humming with the tension of old wounds resurfacing. Jonathan looked between them, finally seeing what had been building in the quiet. He shook his head, face tightening. You always were the martyr, weren't you? He sneered at Calder. Always playing the good son, staying behind, fixing fences, burying Pa. What's next? Gonna marry my leftovers. The words cut. Calder's expression didn't change, but Maribel saw the flicker. She stepped between them, calm and unyielding. I am not what you left behind, she said. I am what I survived. Jonathan sneered. And what? You think this place, this man, is gonna give you more? She tilted her head, studied him the way one might regard a faded coat with holes too large to patch. He already has. For a long moment, Jonathan said nothing. Then he spat into the dirt, turned on his heel, and mounted the mare. You'll regret this, he muttered. Both of you. Neither of them answered. They stood still, hand in hand without even knowing when they'd reached for each other. He rode off toward town, dust rising behind him like ash. Inside, Calder sat by the hearth. Buck curled at his feet, already relaxed. Maribel stirred stew on the stove, hands steady. He watched her, words forming slowly. He was right about one thing, Calder said. I did court a woman once. Long time ago. She didn't stop stirring, but her shoulders stilled. She died before we could speak vows. Fever took her fast. After that, I stopped believing there was more to find. Just worked the land. Kept to myself. Thought maybe love was something you only get once. Maribel turned to face him, eyes soft. Do you still believe that? He looked at her then, the firelight dancing in the glass of her eyes. No, he said. Not anymore. She set the ladle down, crossed to him slowly. He didn't rise. Just waited. Her hand touched his cheek. Not shy. Not tentative. Like she already knew the shape of him. Then don't wait, she whispered. Not if you've found it again. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing. And in that moment, the ghost of Jonathan, his charm, his absences, his empty promises, was finally exorcised. They ate in peace that night. No raised voices. No doubts. After the meal, Calder retrieved the small cedar box that held his mother's wedding ring. He didn't say what it meant yet. He didn't have to. Maribel traced the worn gold with her fingertip. It's not fancy, he said. No, she replied. It's strong. They sat by the fire until late, her head resting on his shoulder, the quiet around them full, not empty. Outside, the stars blinked through the branches. The wind no longer carried threat, only the hush of a season changing. Maribel did not speak of Jonathan again. She had already said all that mattered. And Calder, who had once made a home of silence, now found comfort in the sound of her breathing beside him. Proof that some stories are not stolen or spoiled, but rewritten by the hands that stay when others ride away. Spring came like a secret whispered into the frost. It didn't arrive with fanfare or bloom, but with quiet persistence. Melted snow slipping into the soil, crocuses pushing their stubborn heads through dirt, the creek behind the cabin singing just a little louder. Maribel rose earlier now. Not out of need, but choice. She liked how the air tasted before the sun caught it, like dew and wood smoke and wild things just waking. Inside, the cabin had changed too. Small things, almost invisible unless you lived there. The curtain she had sewn from old flour sacks fluttered when the window opened. Her comb sat beside his brush on the table. A second peg by the door now held her shawl, worn but whole. And beneath the window, a shelf Calder had built by hand cradled her books, her stitched scraps, and the little river stones they'd gathered side by side. They had not spoken vows. Not yet. But their days spoke them for them. In every meal shared. Every silence that didn't need to be filled. Every time Calder brushed wood shavings from her shoulder or Maribel laid a hand on his arm when a memory passed too close. Still, life had its own rhythm. One morning, Calder returned from town with supplies packed tight and an envelope folded into his coat pocket. He handed it to her without a word. It was from her aunt. Postmarked weeks ago. Brief, but not unkind. Heard you made it west. I hope he treats you well. If he doesn't, don't be afraid to leave again. Maribel folded the letter carefully, placed it in her sewing box, and said nothing. But that night, as they sat by the fire, she reached for Calder's hand. I did leave once, she said. But now I've arrived. He didn't respond with words. Just held her fingers gently, the way he always did, like she wasn't fragile, but worth holding carefully anyway. A few days later, the cabin filled with the smell of pine pitch and boiled starch. Calder had trimmed his beard, and Maribel had tied her hair up with ribbon. No one had said why. But they both felt the moment drawing near, as sure as a change in weather. Calder found the old family Bible again. The pages turned slowly beneath his fingers, creased and reverent. When he came to the back, he looked at the line below her name, the one she had written in the weeks before. He handed her the pencil. This time, she wrote more. Maribel James Calloway, wife, 1874. She looked up at him. If that's all right. He smiled. Not wide, just deeply. It's more than. The next morning, they walked into town together. The path was muddy, soft beneath their boots, but they didn't mind. Buck followed close, tail wagging low. They passed the place where she had once nearly died in the snow. Neither of them spoke of it. They didn't have to. Her feet were strong now, her steps steady. They arrived at the church around mid-morning. The preacher, a stout man with tobacco-stained hands and an honest voice, waited with a worn book in hand. No guests. No flowers. Just the wind in the grass and the quiet hush of sacred things. Calder held her hands while the preacher spoke. Maribel looked into his eyes, not blinking. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of love, not of beginnings. "I don't need vows on paper," she said softly. "But I'll speak them anyway. I vow to stay when it's hard. To listen when words are slow to come. To see you, even when the world doesn't." Calder answered in kind. "I vow to carry what you cannot. To leave the past where it belongs. And to keep the fire burning, low and steady, as long as we both draw breath." The preacher smiled, eyes crinkled. "Then by the power vested in me, and the land that bears witness, I pronounce you man and wife." They didn't kiss at first. Just touched foreheads, still as prayer. Then Calder leaned in, brushed her lips with his like a promise whispered beneath snow. They stayed in town just long enough to pick up flour, tobacco, and a bolt of calico she liked. On the way home, Calder paused by the river, pointed toward the east. "There's land beyond that ridge," he said. "A grove of wild plum trees. I was thinking, we could build something there. Bigger. With a porch for sitting. Maybe a swing." Maribel watched the way the wind stirred the treetops. "You want to start again?" "No," he said. "I want to grow what we already have." They marked the place with stones. Side by side. One smooth, one ridged. Like the two of them. Spring deepened. The hens laid more regular. The creek ran clear. And Calder began drawing sketches by lantern light. Simple lines, rough edges. She watched him from the corner of the table, fingers busy with stitches, but eyes full of wonder. "You never told me you could draw," she said one night. He shrugged, sheepish. "It's not art. Just plans." "They're beautiful," she said. "Like blueprints for a life." But not everything bloomed easily. One afternoon, a stranger rode up the trail, asking after Calder. A land agent. Said there were new claims being filed. The homestead would need to be registered again under the new territorial law. Calder's jaw tensed. "They'll want proof," he said that evening. "Signatures. Documents. Witnesses." She met his gaze without flinching. "Then they'll have them." In town, folks whispered when she signed her name beside his in the registrar's book. A few still thought of her as the woman who came for Jonathan and stayed out of pity. But most had learned better. They saw how she moved, unafraid now, eyes clear, spine straight. Mabel from the mercantile pressed a paper-wrapped gift into Maribel's hands before they left. Inside, a spool of lace trim and a note. "For the house you'll build. And the stories you'll write inside it." The new cabin rose slowly, timber by timber. Calder chopped while she hauled. He hammered while she smoothed the joints. They laughed when the first wall tilted. They danced barefoot across the floor once the planks were nailed in place. She painted the window frames pale blue. He carved a bird into the corner beam where the light hit just right. On the final day, they mounted a small wooden sign over the door. The Mercy House. Not for what they had been given, but for what they'd chosen to give each other. The night they moved in, it rained soft and steady. They stood on the porch, newly built, wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table, and watched the drops blur the horizon. "I used to think redemption came in loud ways," she said. "Lightning. Apologies. Grand gestures." Calder handed her a cup of coffee. "And now," she leaned into him, "now I think it comes slow. Like roots. Like rain. Like kindness, kept going." Inside, the fire waited. Calder stoked it. Maribel unwrapped the lace from Mabel's parcel and draped it along the mantel. They didn't need much else. The warmth was theirs. The walls spoke of effort, not memory. Every board a testament to survival reshaped into belonging. Later that night, as the rain softened into mist, she laid beside him beneath a quilt stitched with old names and new hope. He pulled her close. "You were never a second choice," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. "You were just the first one who stayed." Sleep came gently. The dog snored at the foot of the bed. The wind curled around the eaves like a lullaby. By morning, the world smelled clean. Weeks passed, then months. People came by. Neighbors, travelers, a few seeking advice or shelter. They offered what they could. A meal. A place to rest. Maribel became known for her cornbread. Calder for his way of listening without interrupting. One day, as they sat on the porch with coffee in hand, a rider passed by. Young, curious,